And welcome back. My next guest is Dave Anderson, a World War II veteran and a sixth-generation resident of Congers and Clarkstown. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for being here. So you're coming up on a momentous birthday. You'll turn 94 in a little over 2 months, and you've seen a lot of changes here in Clarkstown. Your family's been here for 6 generations. You actually were born and delivered by Dr. Davies from way back when, right?
Yes.
So you have some wonderful experiences of Congers from the bygone days, I would imagine, right? So and maybe at some point you could tell us a little bit about what you remember about growing up in Congers. But let's talk a little bit about your service. You're a veteran of World War II, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
What branch did you serve in World War II?
It's in the Army, Field Artillery.
Field Artillery?
Right.
So how did you get into the Army? Were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I enlisted, yeah.
You enlisted? And when did you enlist? Do you remember?
1943.
1943?
I think, I think that's right.
1943. And where did you do your basic training? Do you remember?
In Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Okay.
In the Field Artillery.
Right. And then after basic training, where did you go?
Basic training, let's see. Well, then I went out to Oklahoma for another course in radio repairmanship.
Mm-hmm.
I was a radio repairman.
As well, okay.
Yeah.
And then where did your service take you after that?
I traveled around different places for a while. I'm trying to think. Pretty soon I went overseas.
Okay.
And went to the Philippine Islands.
Wow, okay, so you were in the Pacific Theater.
In the Pacific, right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about your service in the Philippines and in the Pacific?
Went over there and we landed in many islands in the Philippines, and the big one is Luzon, the big island, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where we landed.
Right.
And that's where I stayed while I was in the Philippines.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were involved in the conquest to retake the Philippines?
Correct, that's correct.
Right.
It was pretty, the battle was sort of over by that time. We had conquered the place or took over and so forth.
Right.
And it was very interesting meeting the Filipino people, and enjoyed it there, really. And of course the war was over, so I
Right.
didn't have to worry about somebody shooting at me right at that point in time.
Right.
But I could see from the people I met that there was big war there, and there was a lot of activity, and I had nothing to do with the fighting of the war or something. But I heard a lot of stories, and it was very interesting listening to all the people, especially some of the veterans that were already there or had been there. In fact, many of the veterans that I met had been there for years.
Wow.
Because they had been in the regular army before the war started, and many of them had married and had their families there, and it was exciting listening to them, and also sort of sad of what they had gone through.
Right.
And I met many of the ones who had seen all the battles, and right from when it first started, and the way they were treated by the Japanese. It was really horrible, some of the things that the men had to go through. But they got through, and many of them didn't
Right.
get through it. Yeah.
So you remind me of having the same conversation with another Congress veteran who passed away about a year ago, Frankie Morea. And Frankie was, such as yourself, was also a World War II vet, served in the Pacific, and 4 years. I remember talking with him, and he was 4 years in the Navy, and had spent time. Frankie, as you know, passed away at the age of, I think, 104 last year.
Yeah, I did not know him.
Okay. So Dave, let's talk just a little bit. So after your service in the Philippines, where did you go from there?
Well, they sent me home, and I was discharged, sent to Fort Dix. That's where I was discharged, and that's pretty much it.
What do you recall about your younger days in Congress? What was Congress like in the late 30s?
Late 30s, I remember, I'll say right off the hat, spent a lot of time on Congress Lake fishing, and it was a great bass lake. People from New York City would come up there, and they would brag about the 6-pound bass that they had caught, and it was very nice, very nice. And I think in a sense, maybe my father or mother, who was sort of like hillbilly land, and I was a local hillbilly, and that's the way it was. And I had good friends. Yep.
Who were did any of your friends also go into the service that you knew?
No, because I wasn't old enough to go into the service.
No, later on, when you went into World War II, any of your friends from growing up, did they also go into the service as well, from Congress?
Yes.
Who were some of the people that you can recall?
Oh, Bill Bowe and all the Gannon boys went. They were older than I,
Right.
and they were our next door neighbors, the Gannon family.
Okay.
A very popular family, and the boys mostly were athletes when they grew up. Joe Gannon was one of the best basketball players at that time. It was the old Congress school that we went to, Congress High School.
Right.
We only had about 100 people in the school at that time, and had lots of fun. And especially in the wintertime, Congress Lake was always packed with ice,
Right.
and we practically lived during the cold weather. We lived on the lake after school. We'd go over there and we'd play hockey. We played lots of hockey. And during the summer, my family would take me back to Congress to Grandma's house. In fact, Grandma's house was the house in which I was born, and our telephone number was 6 at that time.
Really?
When I grew up, yeah. And had a good time growing up. Had lots of good friends, and we were just country boys.
Yeah. One of my favorite memories with you, and we're almost out of time, but one of my favorite memories with you was a couple of years ago. It's probably, I was supervisor, so it may have been 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, at the Memorial Day ceremony. It was very moving because the VMA will sponsor the Memorial Day parade, and then they have the ceremony afterwards in front of the VMA. And they have an honor guard, Clarkson Police Honor Guard typically. They have a rifle salute, they do full military honors, and they ring the fire department bell, the big bell in front of the fire department, which has a very pronounced, loud, and haunting ring. And they'll ring it once for each name as it's read. And one year, just once, and I thought it was so beautiful, the VMA had you speak about each of the names on the sign, who are folks that had died, who lived in Congers, who died in the war, different wars. So, and you spoke about folks from World War II that you knew. You spoke about folks from Korea that you knew, Vietnam, and obviously as a sixth-generation Congers family, you and your family have been there through the thick and the thin of a lot of changes, in our town and in Congers, and you had personal experience and knowledge of a lot of these folks. You're probably one of the few people that's still around that has personal knowledge of some of these folks, and you spoke a little bit about each of these individuals, and it was very moving, and I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for being a great guest, and I want to thank you for your service to our country as a veteran of the Army, and your contribution to the VMA and to our community for these very many years. Thank you so much.
Very good, yeah. I enjoyed growing up in Congers, and I can remember specifically, I think we lost 17 men killed, Congeroids, what we call them.
Yeah.
That's sort of a joke, Congeroid.
No, absolutely. In fact, we had, and you spoke about very many of them, and we'll show a photo of the monument that I'm talking about, and the names on that plaque. But you brought those names alive for a lot of the people a couple of years ago, and for that we're grateful. But that's about all the time that we have. I want to thank you, Dave, for being a great guest, and I want to thank you for your service to our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for thinking of me and letting me speak that one time. I can remember that, and I was moved by my own speaking voice.
Yeah.
I never talked about people in Congress that much.
Yeah.
But as memories, great little town.
Well, absolutely is.
Okay.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back with Suzanne Barkley, our next guest, the Executive Director of Cornell Cooperative Extension. Be right back.